The U.S. and other Western governments are closely monitoring some developments in Syria right now, where Islamist rebels recently launched an offensive attack against government forces that have resulted in more than 400 deaths. And earlier today, Syria's army said that its forces were working to secure parts of the region around Aleppo, which is the second largest city there in Syria. And that city, the rebel forces have actually taken control of. So what do all these latest developments mean for the Middle East? And more specifically, could this impact the war that Israel has underway with Hamas? Well, joining me now from Jerusalem to discuss this is Chris Mitchell. He's a Middle East bureau chief for CBN News. Chris, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Jody.
Okay, well, let's just begin. So much is happening right now in the entire region. But for those who perhaps have not been tracking this and what's been unfolding in Syria, can you kind of give us a walk through some of the timeline of what's taken place this past week?
Well, Jody, several days ago, two main jihadist groups, the HTS, known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and also the Syrian National Army, launched an offensive, and we believe were tacitly approved by Turkey. And they went down the civil war between the Bashar Assad regime and these rebel groups has really been sort of on hold for many years. And then they launched this offensive, and presumably they have taken over Syria's second largest city, Aleppo. And this is very strategic. First time the rebels ever controlled that city, and then they've gone even further south. Now, they do represent a possible threat to the Bashar Assad regime. And right now, so you have Turkey on one side, there's a lot of geopolitics going on right now. You also have on the other side Iran and Russia. Syria to Iran represents a key component of its regional plan, and they use Syria as a land bridge to be able to supply weapons to Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah has been largely decimated by the IDF in the last couple of months. And also the fact that Israel has attacked and degraded Hezbollah has allowed some sort of a vacuum to allow these Syrian rebel groups to come down farther south and take over Aleppo and other places. So right now we understand that Iran and Russia are fighting back against these rebel groups. So a lot happening, as you say, Jody, and this represents just one more turmoil here in a very, very volatile region.
Yeah, so much turmoil. Is there anything, Chris, that you're aware of that really was that ignited this? Was there anything that took place that was the spark for all of this? What is the reason behind the timing?
I think one thing, Jody, is the vacuum left by Hezbollah and the weakness of this Iranian proxy group that had been in Syria before. And actually, if you go back several years, the Hezbollah, as well as Russia, were able to stop the advance of the rebel groups in the Syrian civil war. So the degrading by Israel of Hezbollah has allowed this vacuum to take place. That's one of the factors that really is constituting what's happening right now.
So just that vacuum was enough to do it. It seemed like, as you said, with so much other turmoil taking place in the region, that there would be some degree of hesitancy with it. Or I guess when they saw a potential weakness, they just jumped on it. Now, you mentioned that this is taking place kind of in the northwest part of Syria, but that they were moving southward, if I heard you correctly, which obviously is coming closer to Israel. So what could this potentially mean? Is this going to have some sort of effect on Israel in at least a significant way?
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday that they're closely monitoring what's happening there in Syria. Right now, it doesn't necessarily represent an immediate threat to the Jewish state because geographically, where the rebels are right now is still pretty far away from the Golan Heights and Israel's northern border. So right now, they don't represent an immediate threat. Let me mention a couple of other factors why this offensive may have taken place right now, Jody. Russia, one of the key factors there inside Syria, has been distracted by its war with Ukraine. And also Iran has been distracted and weakened by attacks by Israel and also its two main proxies that surround Israel, both Hezbollah and Hamas. But right now, it seems like it's a long way down to either Damascus, which is the headquarters of the Bashar Assad regime, and or the Golan Heights and Israel's border. But both of these actors, Jody, to remind people, these groups are jihadist groups. This is branches of al-Qaeda or derivatives of al-Qaeda. These are groups that want to take over the entire Middle East and certainly ambitions to destroy Israel. But right now, they're pretty far away from Israel's northern border.
Just absolutely fascinating. It just seems like it's one thing after another that's taking place in the entire region, while Israel continues to do an incredible job in securing Israel and eliminating these enemies of Israel and in many respects enemies of the world. But it just seems like yet another layer unfolds. So if we can, let me just transition, Chris, with all of this. One of the big news items here has been the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. How is that holding up, and how do you anticipate it holding up?
Well, just in the last few hours, Jody, there was an attack by Hezbollah. 2 mortars were fired against a place called Mount Dov. That's a disputed area right along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Israel takes that very serious, that violation. Since the beginning of the ceasefire several days ago, there's been a number of violations by Hezbollah. Israel has been quite forceful in responding to any sort of violation, whether it's a rocket launcher or terrorists coming into what right now is a no-go zone for anybody from Lebanon, right along the Israeli-Lebanese border. The IDF still maintains positions there, and that is there as a buffer to protect any Israeli residents to go back to their homes along the Israeli side of the border. But right now, it's still tentative. Israel seems to be enforcing forcefully what it can do to strike back at Hezbollah for any violations there in southern Lebanon.
So is it fair to say that the ceasefire has really not taken effect, or is this just a matter of it's in effect to some extent, but there's still a little flexing of the muscles? How would you describe this?
I would say flexing of the muscles, certainly by Hezbollah, what they did in the last few hours. And I would say it's a fragile ceasefire. And I would say that Israel is interpreting the terms of the ceasefire in a very robust way to hit any sort of violation by Hezbollah.
Wow. So what is the Israeli government hoping, as we here in the United States are seeing a transition of power from the Biden administration to the upcoming Trump administration? What is Israel hoping that President-elect Trump will be able to do to build upon the ceasefire that is pretty tenuous, as you described?
Yeah, well, it is a 60-day ceasefire, so it's going to expire right about January 20th when President Trump's going to take office. I know President Trump is saying he's there to stop wars, not start wars. And I think what's going to happen, Jody, is that there's going to be a much more meeting of the minds with the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government. Through the past beginning of the war since October 7th, the Israeli government has been fighting the Biden administration in many ways. For example, there is a limited arms embargo by the Biden administration against Israel, not necessarily giving it all the weapons they need to fight either Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah up in Lebanon. Also, politically, they have tried to undermine the government. You probably remember famously Senator Schumer asking Israelis that maybe they should choose another government. So I think that's been the history for a number of months for the relationship with the White House and the current Netanyahu coalition government. Looking forward, I think there's going to be a much more better relations, warmer relations. I think they're going to be on the same page in regards to Iran, the biggest threat here in the Middle East, and Iran's nuclear program, an existential threat to the Jewish state, as well as the threat of Hezbollah and Hamas. And looking forward as well, I know Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, was saying President Trump really wants to see a ceasefire. He also wants to see the release of the hostages as well. And that's something people here in Israel have been hoping and praying for ever since October 7th.
Wow. So much. So it seems like so many moving pieces. I remember, Chris, being there personally when the embassy was moved to Jerusalem and the celebration of the Israeli people. And I remember the front page of the Jerusalem Post had a huge picture of President Trump saying promises made, promises kept. And there was this great celebration. I would think that there's a degree of that same sense of positive anticipation with the transition of the incoming Trump administration and how it's playing out there in Israel. Is that an accurate portrayal, or are people there excited to see what they believe will be an administration for the United States that will have Israel's heart very close to the heart here in the U.S.?
Very much so, Jody. You know, when the election results were announced here, there were some TV stations directly celebrating and singing during the campaign. If the polls here said that 66% of Israelis supported President Trump over Vice President Kamala Harris. So there definitely is an anticipation of a much better relationship, cemented, I think, by the nomination of former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. And I think he's going to bring a whole fresh relationship between the government here and the upcoming White House and administration. And I think a lot of people we're just waiting, anticipating a very sort of fresh start in January 20th and beyond.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, how the Governor Huckabee was being received, and you just hit on that, because I mean, obviously, people like you and myself, believers here in the United States, as well as those there in Israel, I would think would be very excited about the potential role of Governor Huckabee with the ambassador to Israel. But you say that is being received with great favor and positive anticipation.
Very much so, Jody. Looking forward to Mike Huckabee has been here more than 100 times. I think it's been 52 years since he first came here to Israel. Has a close relationship with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, just a few hours after he was nominated, he got a call from Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think Governor Huckabee brings a historical understanding of the situation here. He brings a biblical understanding of the situation as well. And so I think many people are quite excited, not only here in Israel, but many evangelical Christians in the United States as well celebrate his nomination. And I would add this, Jody, with all the things going on right now in Syria, the Hezbollah on the northern border, Hamas on the southern border, really a profound reminder to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to pray for the release of the hostages, and pray for the comfort for the people of Israel. They've gone through nearly 14 months of war. Many people are experiencing PTSD. They need the comfort, and they certainly need an ally in the White House.
Well, I did want to ask you how we can be praying specifically for the people of Israel, and I appreciate you sharing those things, and we certainly will be praying. Let me ask you this, Chris. What about the Syrian Christian community? How are they being pulled into all of this, or their safety, or anything along those lines? How can we be praying for the Syrian Christians?
Well, there's not too many left. And unfortunately, over the last 15 years or so, or maybe more, there's really been a massive Christian exodus from the Middle East with the rise of ISIS and all the jihadi groups that have risen in the last 15, 20 years. But there are Christians, we believe, in Aleppo, about 20,000, and they need prayer because right now, Aleppo being controlled by a jihadist group that is very has great animus against Christian believers. They can go through forced conversion, they can go through death, and so a lot of threats potentially against these Christians in Syria. So really, it's very, very important to be praying for them, their safety during this very tumultuous time there in Aleppo and Syria.
I think it's so important, Chris, that we remember what you just said. There's so much at stake for Israel, and we need to be praying for Israel. But there are major issues right now for Syrian believers and others who are trapped in this horrible scenario that's developing. And I just thank you, as always, Chris Mitchell, for your tremendous reporting and keeping us up to speed as to what's going on there in Israel, and be able to give these updates as you do. Man, we just appreciate it so much. Tremendous blessings to you, the peace of Israel, and the Israeli people as a whole. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jody. God bless.